Okay, tell me a story about something that you cannot explain. I'll go first. So a friend of mine, let's call her Jenna, she lived in this old Gothic house. And I don't know, it was just super creepy, and I just hated being there. This happened in like 2007 when 4 of us went to Jenna's house after school and her parents weren't home. And I remember we left all of our coats and bags on the dining table and then we went upstairs to watch TV. And we're just sat in her bedroom when we hear a massive crash from downstairs. And I remember we just went like dead still. And like absolutely terrified, we all snuck down the stairs to investigate. And there was nothing, no broken glass, the doors were still locked. But then one of the other girls says, where's our stuff? All of our stuff was gone, dining table empty. And that is when Jenna screamed. And she's pointing out into the backyard. All of our stuff was scattered across the yard, each item perfectly placed individually. And I thought, okay, it must be a prank. But then I realized there were no footprints in the snow. And I still can't explain that. Tell me a story about something that you cannot explain.
My best friend and I have always been obsessed with the paranormal. We used to ghost hunt, play with Ouija boards, anything. I never found anything, despite my grandfather and great-grandmother both dying in my parents' house. One night, she's sleeping over, and we're sleeping in the living room, and we're sort of parallel with the street. All of a sudden, a very bright light flies across me, across her, and goes into the wall. It couldn't have been a car because we are parallel with the street, so a car would have been going like this way, but the light went this way. And I had my eyes closed, but I still saw it. And I turned to her, I opened my eyes, I turned to her and I said, "Did you just see that?" And she said, "No." And I, of course, said, "Me neither." And there was silence for a second, and we both ran upstairs.
Tell me a story about something that you cannot explain.
So I live in an absurdly haunted house. My family owns 3 houses in a row, each one more haunted than the next, and we have ghosts that travel between the 3 houses. Plus, my hometown is famous for UFO sightings, so I got plenty of these. But the creepiest thing that's ever happened to me was in the middle of the night when I was 12, sleeping on the couch. Something hits the back of my couch. I turn around to look at it, and there are shadow people walking from my bedroom to my basement, which is like 3 rooms worth in my open concept house. And what had hit the back of my couch was this mannequin looking thing that was like just piles of flesh over human form with no face, no eyes, nothing, just like the indents where everything should be. That did not acknowledge my existence at all, but I watched it walk down into the basement.
Tell me a story about something that you cannot explain.
So when me and my older brother were still living at home with our parents, one night my parents were gone and I kept waking up because I could hear someone like walking back and forth in front of my door of my bedroom. And I text my brother and I was like, "Hey, is that you walking back and forth in front of my door?" He was like, "No, I'm playing video games. Like, what are you talking about?" So I kept hearing it over and over and over, and finally I was like, "How can you not hear this? It's so loud. I can hear feet dragging." So he was annoyed because I kept making him paranoid. And then finally we both met in the hall of our house and he was like, "What are you talking about? There's nothing going on." And while I was explaining it to him, behind one of the walls that has nothing behind it, something slammed the wall so hard, and we still to this day cannot explain it.
Tell me a story about something that you cannot explain. I'll go first.
Okay, I'm excited about this one because this is the one and only time I ever actually saw something, and my dad was there too. So if you're from the South, I can almost guarantee that you have been to a Cracker Barrel. A Cracker Barrel is a country-style restaurant that has a little store in it, and it's set up kind of like this, where it has all these random artifacts all over the wall. And every single table has one of these oil lamps at the end of each one. So me having a strong sense of Sonder and also being interested in the paranormal and anything creepy, I started talking about the artifacts, wondering where any of them came from, who they belonged to. As my dad and I are discussing all of these artifacts and where they came from and who they belong to, 2 tables away from us, one of these oil lamps fell off the table and shattered all over the ground. My dad and I both saw it, and we just stared at each other in disbelief, and one of the waitresses even came out like with this wild look on her face, like, "What happened?" We were like, "I don't know, bro, but I think your restaurant's haunted."
Tell me a story about something that you cannot explain.
Well, I can explain my perspective, but it clearly wasn't reality. So in college, I used to work at a Staples, and there was one morning that I was supposed to be working the opening shift. My manager and I were already there, and a coworker was supposed to be bringing me an energy drink that morning, and he was running behind. So I'm standing at the cash registers at the front of the store, looking out the front towards the parking lot to see if I could spot his car coming. Well, the entire storefront was glass, and as I'm looking out towards the parking lot, I see someone in the reflection walking behind me and past me. So thinking it was my manager, I turn quickly and say, "Hey, Quentin." But there was nobody there. And to this day, I know I saw something, I saw someone, but it wasn't my manager. Mind you, this plaza that the Staples was on was built right next to a cemetery that had been there for decades.
Tell me a story about something that you cannot explain.
Okay, I had to do this. A little background first. I have a brother with autism and 4 other brothers, so I have 5 brothers total. I am the oldest. I had to have been about 13, 14 at the time. Our babysitter was over, everyone was in bed, and we had this thing where we decided we were gonna watch scary movies together. We chose to watch The Exorcism of Emily Rose, which was so stupid, now that I think about it. At the part where the exorcism was happening, we noticed someone in the kitchen, and they were getting things out of the pantry and throwing them on the floor. All you could see is a shadow, the way that my parents' house was set up. We had assumed it was my brother with autism, that he had snuck down the stairs and was getting stuff out of the pantry. We thought it would be funny to scare him, so we went around the corner and stood there and went 1, 2, 3 and jumped out. No one was there, nothing was on the ground. We returned to the couch and a tall figure walks by at the door.
Okay, tell me a story about something that you cannot explain.
When my middle daughter was 4, me and my ex were arguing. We were in the process of breaking up because I was going through a spiritual awakening that he couldn't accept, and he couldn't even accept that we were falling apart. So we're in the middle of this argument, and my 4-year-old daughter walks in the middle of us, and she looks up at him and she says, "Hey, Adam, it's me, Paw." Now, my daughter, she calls one grandpa, Grandpa. She calls the other grandpa, Papu. She has never called anybody Pawpaw. Anyway, Adam's grandpa died when he was 7, and he mentioned it to me one time and never mentioned it again. My daughter was at her dad's. She wasn't even anywhere near, so she had never heard this before. But she looks up at him. He drops, we're like, "What did you say?" And she repeats it, "It's me, Pawpaw." And then he drops down in front of her, and she takes his face in her hands, and she says, "You're growing up so big and tall. Everything's gonna be okay." We were crying.
Okay, tell me a story about something that you cannot explain.
So my middle daughter from the other story said a lot of weird stuff around that time in her life. One of the things that weirded me out that she used to talk about around then was she said she owned a chicken and a bad man named Frankie hurt her. Okay. So completely unrelated, I read this theory that you reincarnate 100 years after you die. I decided to look up people who died 100 years before I was born. And I read about this Oklahoma outlaw called Belle Starr. You can look her up. Now she caught my attention because her dad called her Maybelle. My middle daughter's name is Maybella. So I'm reading about her life and I'm like, okay, there's nobody named Frankie, whatever. Until I got to the end of her life where she was murdered. It's an unsolved murder. But the last person to see her was a man named Frank who pointed the finger at somebody else who got hung.